So welcome everybody. Welcome to this sixth webinar in the PLEI Connect project. Our subject today is online tools for measuring impact, and we're delighted to have you all together here today. So my name is Hubert David. I'm the head of partnerships and innovation at Éducalois, PLEI, a public legal education and information organization in Quebec. So I'm your host for this series of webinars. Our speaker today is Fiona MacCool. She's a project manager for Your Legal Rights, a CLEO project. It's a CLEO actually website that she'll be talking to us about. And so our schedule today is definitely to introduce her, and then we'll be going further. Project partners for this series is CLEO, Community Legal Education of Ontario, Courthouse Libraries of BC, Éducalois, and PovNet. We're delighted to have funding from our two project funders, the Law Foundation of Ontario and the Department of Justice of Canada. Thanks to them, it's thanks to them that we're able to provide you with this series of webinars for free. So I think we all appreciate their funding. Thank you. A reminder to register for PLEI Connect, which is the online community, and where the tagline says it all, where technology and public legal education and information meet. So a lot of discussion boards going on there, and a lot of groups that can be created on there, so to be very useful to all kinds of organizations. So please, for those that haven't, please feel free to register for this community. It's really useful, and this way you can follow all the phases of this project. So today's webinar, a quick description is our public legal education and information, PLE or PLEI, is increasingly delivered online. This webinar will revisit key performance indicators, KPIs, and look at how to leverage a number of free and low-cost online tools that include Google Analytics and eye perception surveys to acquire data to measure your impact. Other tools that will be discussed today include online user testing tools, as well as A/B testing, and what metrics matter when it comes to social media evaluation. You're all encouraged to share examples, questions, and tools from your own work. And our speaker today, as I said earlier, is Fiona MacCool. She's the project manager for Your Legal Rights. It's a website of legal information for people in Ontario. And for over 16 years, Fiona has worked as an online project manager, a software trainer, and web content developer. She's a non-techie at heart. Fiona is passionate about helping nonprofit organizations take advantage of the cost-efficient and time-saving power of the Internet to support community partnerships, share resources, and make a difference, which, wow, I'm impressed. So Fiona, I'll pass the ball to you, and this way you can start your presentation. And hello, Fiona.
Hi there. Thanks, everybody. So it's great to be here, and I think this is the last of our web labs and webinars, and today's a bit of a mishmash of lots of things that I've learned. I'm going to include tools that I heard about at one of the webinars that I'm playing around with. So I really hope that you jump in with questions. What I'm going to show you, I am not a developer, I'm not a programmer, so these are tools that I found that were either free or very, very cheap that I found useful. And hopefully we're putting it in some kind of framework of trying to figure out how to measure our work doing PLEI and stuff on the web. So again, it's a tasting menu of some tools I've learned about, and I'm really hoping that you folks can jump in with ones that you've used, or if a particular one jumps out at you, we can stop and take a closer look. So I just thought I'd begin just letting you know kind of what I'm hoping to cover today. So I thought we should just very quickly revisit the whole idea of key performance indicators. So this was covered in more detail in an earlier webinar here in the PLEI Connect series, but I find it really helpful because without that, you can just feel like you're just drowning in data. And so I find the whole key performance indicators things are a really useful framework to try to figure out what to measure and how often. So carrying from that, we'll take a quick look at Google Analytics. There are people who are SEO experts who do nothing but look at Google Analytics for a living, and I'm not certainly one of those people. I can tell you that what I find very useful in terms of the basics, and then a tiny bit of additional things that I've tried to do to sort of get some good answers from Google Analytics. I'm hoping there's others on the call who know more and can jump in. I thought we could talk a little bit about online user testing. We all build these websites and apps, and we want to sort of see what troubles people have with them and if there's ways to do that online. I've tried a little bit to do some stuff online, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what I've done so far. And I'm hoping if, again, other people have examples they can share. And then I thought we could look at the user experience survey. So I'm going to take a little bit of a tour of the 4Q/iPerception survey that we use. It's I think it's used a lot out there, so I'm hopefully taking a look at that and sharing some of the challenges that I've had in using that and understanding what to do with all that information. And then, again, I'm not a super huge expert in this, but we've been doing social media stuff for 3 years now on Your Legal Rights through Twitter and Facebook and Vimeo and all that kind of stuff. So I thought we could have a chat about how do you evaluate whether all of that work is worth it? So what do you measure? What does it mean? And most importantly, of course, is questions and discussions, which don't have to wait till the end. So I'm hoping if you hope to keep you awake here, and if you have any questions, you can jump in. So when I'm talking about evaluation today, I don't mean a single measurement. So I'm not sort of, you do a 3-year project and you hire a third-party evaluator to figure out through interviews whether you were successful. That's kind of not the way I'm thinking about evaluation. I mean it, and obviously not just a collection of statistics. While they're incredibly important, just collecting them in and of itself doesn't really give you the answers you need. So I see it as an ongoing process that helps me figure out how to improve my site and helps me figure out what's happening in ways that are actually based on evidence. And of course, most importantly, bringing it back to the whole point of CLEO and the whole point of where I work and why we're doing what we're doing. Now, that's a nice paragraph, but it's easier said than done. So, but that's certainly the framework in which I'm trying to understand all these tools and how to use them. So, again, if we just, for some of you, you may know this, so we'll kind of jump quickly, but just to define what a key performance indicator, it's kind of corporate speak, but I find it helpful. It's basically performance measures. So it's a sense of objective evidence, and it measures the degree to which a result is happening over time. So another way of seeing it is feedback about how you're improving. So why do we use KPIs when we're trying to evaluate stuff? It lets us set targets that are quite concrete, and it allows us to figure out if we're improving over time. So, sometimes in the non-profit sector. Oh, I'm getting a note to slow down my speech, so I apologize. I do talk too fast. So again, let me know if I continue to speak too quickly. So again, KPIs let us set targets and look at how we're doing over vast periods of time. So rather than just in our funding reports, it lets us, more than that, it lets us internally take a look at what we're doing online. And it also lets you take action to improve. So we want them to be actionable when we think of what a KPI is. And they let us measure the viability of these time-consuming activities. So if you are in charge of a web project that has 5 components, and a couple of them are really important and some of them are extraneous, perhaps they're not your top priority, they let you measure the amount of time you're putting in versus the kind of value that they have. And then, of course, the most important thing is, like, what's the point and why are we doing this, and are we actually delivering on our promises? So the learnings that I got from thinking about this is that this is not something that I should be left to do on my own as the web person or the project manager. So, and often I am. So I really, I'm trying to be an agent within my own organization to brainstorm this process with others, including management. So oftentimes the web project or the technical piece is sort of offloaded onto the person who does the content or something, and it's just up to them. And so really we should be kind of always coming together as a group. The next thing is there isn't one magic tool. So I'm showing you a handful, but this idea that, oh, you have Google Analytics tracking code on your site, so you're all set. And so there's no one magic tool that's going to do this for you. So there is no survey, no matter how perfectly you wrote the questions, that would get at everything. So what I'm learning as I go, and I'm happy to be told I'm wrong about that. One of you may know of a magic tool, but I don't think there is one. You need to come at it with a combination of things, and you have to keep modifying them all the time. So, and most importantly, we need to share how we're doing this, because we are breaking new ground. So public legal education is a pretty small community in Canada, certainly. And those of us who are trying to figure out technology and online learning and PLEI, even smaller. So we have to try to apply some of the stuff we're going to learn out in, when we Google these things and we're kind of out on our own. We have to constantly modify and apply them to the nonprofit world and to legal information. So I'm hoping we can share what we're learning as we go. And that's what PLEI Connect's for. So the process when you're doing a KPI is having a clear strategy, then you come up with your KPIs, and then you implement them. And that's often that third green bar there is kind of something people miss sometimes. I know I've worked on web projects where I have an idea of what I was measuring in my original proposal, but then by the time the site is built, you realize that you haven't actually set the site up all that well to measure those specific things. So, you have to kind of constantly look at all of the components in this process, and then, of course, measuring and then improving. So those are the various phases. So when we think of what makes a good KPI, so the best way for me to think about a good KPI is this one question there, like, how will we know we're successful? So the answer is, we will know that we're successful when this result is achieved. And if a good KPI, for example, would not be people will know more about their rights. Even though I've actually said things like that in many, many proposals, my project will be a success if more people in Ontario are aware of their legal rights. That's that's a terrific thing to want, but the reason it doesn't work that great as a KPI is it's not very specific, and more importantly, it's not measurable. So unless I have a longitudinal study where I can track and follow a huge amount of people in Ontario throughout their entire life based on whether they, did or did not learn their rights from my site, it's very, very hard to make that manageable. And it's not very attainable because a whole bunch of the things are beyond my control as the person who does the website. It's certainly relevant, but it's also not very time-bound. So again, we're trying to be more specific. So we know that our site will be successful when we've achieved X. And so again, you're trying to come up with the answer to that X that's specific and measurable, and you can actually attain it and look at it over time. So I find looking at some of those things helpful. So you have to look at your success evidence. So again, and we're revisiting this stuff, but I find this helpful. So these are 5 kinds of success evidence that you might be looking at. So one, if you're a site that raises money, whether it's online purchases or fundraising, measuring your financial success evidence is pretty easy in the sense of you have goals and you've met them. So no money flies around on any of the projects I work on. So that particular type of success evidence in terms of finance isn't relevant to me, but it is one way of looking at it. Another one is behavioral. So are people doing what you hoped they would? So we want people to sign up to take the PLEI Connect webinars, and then we want them to view the archived ones over time. So our success evidence would be registrations and viewings and looking at an engagement over time with the project. And the next is experiential. So rather than just statistics, we want people to think this process is improving. So we've given them a task. Let's say that task is that we want them they're a client and they want to do an online request for something, and so it's a bit of an intake issue. So we want to measure whether that intake interview is less time consuming and frustrating for the client. The next one is attitudinal, so that would be, getting a new perspective, and so that's more about how do they feel about the project that you've presented to them or the information. So that's looking at sort of their task completion levels and how they report an increase or decrease in satisfaction. And then the last one is, again, hard to fix and easy to measure, and those are technical things. So if my site is too slow and people give up on it before before they click through, or if it works terrible on a mobile phone or something and they just leave, I can try and measure that. So the evidence of success might be, something like an average page load time gets reduced over time, or fewer, broken links or something like that. And I just want to give credit to Brian Robertson from Open Road. He was our presenter on an earlier webinar on this stuff. So I found his slides really helpful, and I'm obviously drawing on them, and I just want to give credit where it's due, because I learned what I'm learning. I won't say what I know. I learned what I'm learning from them when they covered this stuff earlier. So some examples of metrics, and again, I'm hoping once we get and look at lots of tools, we can remember some of these slides. So, if you had internal processes, some of your KPIs might be internal. They might be that you've decided that you want to be more efficient, or that you've decided that you have certain goals about responding to clients quicker. So those might be things like the percentage of time on average that you take to respond to email questions, or whether the amount of phone calls has been reduced once you've put your information online or something like that. Other things might be the percentage of your content that's a certain age. So if you have a legal information website, and you can track how often you're reviewing the content and trying to keep it fresh. And again, you have to look at the appropriate time frame. There's no magic number for that. So with legal information, as I'm learning, some things that are 5 years old are just as good and relevant and helpful as things that are newer. That's not the only measure, but you can come up with the right KPI for your audience and your content. And other ones might be the percentage of users that can complete their task and site satisfaction. And again, we're going to look at some tools that would help you actually measure these things in a minute. But knowing in advance, instead of using the tools and going backwards, we're going to try to think about this as like, what does my success look like? Like, what can I do to measure to find out if I'm, if I'm achieving what I want? And then we look at these tools and we hopefully try and use them to answer. So other learnings that I've gotten when I've tried to do this stuff is, again, as I tried to say earlier, sometimes you have to make some customizations or small changes and configurations to your website early on to make sure that they're able to collect what you plan to measure. So Google Analytics is great, and even if you do nothing special to your website, it's going to tell you lots of great things, but it's not quite enough on its own. So if you are a developer, you probably know all this, but if you're not and you're using developers, if you could kind of address that early on. So for example, if your site is all about sending people to external websites where they're opening websites and they're leaving your site, traditional Google Analytics or web stats, they don't really capture that. So if you're a directory of information and you have lots of great links to all different legal information all over the world, all over the province and all over the country, you actually want to track the outbound links. So you want to track where people go and which ones they open, and that sometimes can take some tweaking on your site in the first place. So that's something to think about early if you can. So if you have a strategy, it makes it easy to have that meeting with your developers and go, okay, now this is really important. I want to track this particular thing, and when someone plays an external video on my website from YouTube, I want to know, and I don't want to have to go to YouTube to get that. So maybe you won't be able to get everything you want, but knowing what you'd like to measure early on when you're building the site is smart, and I'm saying that because I haven't always done it myself. That's something I've learned the hard way. And the next is the raw numbers. They're not helpful to just look at your hits or your visits. They're not very actionable. It's better to look at percentages over time. It's also more impressive to look at your sort of victories, and it makes you scratch your head when you see decreases in things. So if you simply spit out big numbers in reports and send them out, it doesn't really tell you the shifts over time. And so it's better to, and it's also quite longitudinal, like I can be impatient and I'll see like a change over a week and I'll want to change everything on my site. So you have to kind of look at over huge amounts of time. So measuring your monthly and annual benchmarks is actually quite helpful because it tells you a better story. So this is an example from my work. So the site I work on, which is Your Legal Rights, actually replaced an original site called CleoNet, which was for service providers. So it was a legal information site that was not that different than the one we have now, but it was for service providers. So we didn't aim it at the general public, and then we decided to relaunch a new and improved, better version and try and tell the wider world about it. So the goal was to expand our audience from service providers to the general public. So that's not the easiest thing to measure. You can't tell from statistics on a website from Google Analytics like who your users are. You can't really tell. And you can get at it anecdotally from the kind of email requests you get. But what I'm trying to do here is an example, and again, I don't know if I'm doing it perfectly, but this is my attempt to kind of get at an actual answer. So I figure I have two things I want to do as a result here. So if my goal is to expand my audience from one to an additional, also larger audience, so my first result is that I want to increase traffic, because the reason we expanded was that there's a very small number of service providers, not that we were reaching all of them, but we want to reach a bigger audience in general. So an obvious thing is to see an increase in traffic. So I tried, instead of throwing out raw numbers, I want this many visitors, because I kind of didn't know. I did know that I wanted to see like a 30 to 50% increase over the entire year from one to the next. And then the second thing, which is harder for me to figure out, is I want to see an increase in the percentage of users that report using the information for themselves versus using it to help clients. So I get at that in two ways. One is Google Analytics, which tells me just overall traffic and page views. And the second thing is a survey that I'm going to show you that we use to kind of look at audience and purpose over time. and then try and see if we are getting at that. Now, there may be additional things that I haven't thought of, but those are some examples where they have relatively clear and measurable examples. So another one would be that we've done webinars, much like you're taking right now with me, but we did webinars on the law for service providers in Ontario. So our goal is to increase the reach of PLEI that used to be done mostly just in local in-person workshops, but reach a wider number of people through the Your Legal Rights website. So again, the result is that within a year of doing this, we would do 10 to 12, that we'd reach over 100 people in person and over 1,000 would watch it archived. So again, I measure that by how many webinars we've done, how many people have taken them live, and how many people have watched them later. So I have to have a way to measure how many people have watched the video, which I know sounds really obvious, but you sometimes realize, oh, that's some embedded player hiding way up in my web page, and I can't actually tell who's playing the video. So we've had to experiment and find ways to get the answer to that. And then, of course, the other result there is that people would want to deliver these webinars with us, and so we track that. And then we also ask in our survey after each webinar if it met the learning needs. And so we track the percentage of people that report that they found it useful, and we track that over time. So that's an example of something that's hopefully measurable and attainable, and we report on that regularly. So a couple of phrases that come up all the time in these various tools are benchmarking versus baselines. So again, benchmarking is when you're comparing your process against your competitors. So again, this is language from sort of corporate business speak, so it can be off-putting. But it is also, and correct me if I'm wrong, I find it kind of impossible because it's very hard in this sector to know. You know, how do I know what Click Law in BC, how do I know what their various statistics are? Because that's sort of something that they're choosing to report to their funder and so on. So you know, it's very hard without me informally calling them up and asking them to get that sense. So PLEI Connect gives us a chance to share that informally. So we can go onto the PLEI Connect website and we can kind of say, hey, what's your bounce rate? Or hey, you know, what's like, have you guys noticed, you know, traffic to your, how many people are coming to your site from mobile sources and so on. Some of those key metrics, maybe we could talk to one another. But benchmarking is something, if you were in a for-profit business, there would be lots of tools that you could just compare yourself against other businesses, and there's tools in Google and AdWords that let you do that, and MailChimp and other things. It's a little bit hard to do in the work that we do. Baselines are more important, which is basically just having an initial known value that you can compare against later. So again, don't forget, if you're going to relaunch or redesign your site, even in a small way, or improve it in some way, you have to establish a whole bunch of core statistics and numbers so that you have a baseline to measure whether your redesign helped or didn't help. And that, sometimes we forget to do that. So again, an example of some measurement things might be for, you know, if we redesign a site, the last 3 months of the site we had before versus the first 3 months of the site as it was redesigned, and then looking at it year to year. You can also look at the number of likes on your Facebook page or the followers on Twitter over time. And this is something that sort of, it can be frustrating that, you know, you can't go into Twitter and measure, you know, you can't put in the 6 months your funder wants you to report on and look at how many tweets you did. So you do have to kind of remind yourself, if you're tracking Facebook and Twitter, that you might have to do that yourself. You might have to manually go in at key points in the year and take a look at your followers or take a look at your activities. And so sometimes having these things in your mind and little reminders that it's been 6 months and it's time to go and collate a bunch of things and put them into a document for later is helpful. And also targeting your baseline to your audience. It's something that can be a little frustrating, that Google tracks country and city, but it doesn't really track provinces. Now, I could be wrong about that, but certainly when I'm trying to get information on Ontario, I have to do it Canada, and then I have to look at a bunch of cities. And there can also be challenges with the fact that sometimes the information on the city is incorrect because sometimes servers are located in big cities like Toronto, and it doesn't mean everybody who's using that particular network is actually located in Toronto. So, you know, these are some things that you learn when you sort of talk to other people in the sector and try to compare notes. So, I mean, we can certainly talk a little bit about that later. So I just wanted to kind of talk about a couple of tools that have been helpful for me, and I hope if you want to hear about any of them in more detail, or you love or hate them, or I'm missing some, again, just a tasting menu, you can chime in here at any time. So we're going to show you them in more detail a little bit later, but I thought I would just kind of go through a few slides of some tools that I have found useful. And again, they're either free or very, very cheap, because that's the only way that I would be able to use them. I don't have a huge budget for this kind of stuff. I kind of just do it on top of the work I do running the site. So the most famous is Google Analytics, and that lets you track use, lets you see where your users are coming from and what they're doing, what they're clicking on. It'll also allow you to set up some goals or events based on your key performance indicators. So when you figure out what you want to measure, you can set them up right in Google Analytics to make it easier to measure that, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. The next is something I don't know tons about, but heat maps. And so heat maps are ways that you can use tools to record a session of someone using your website. So it actually records the different people that use your website and kind of puts it into a map to show you what they're clicking on, how long it's taking them. And the idea there is it helps you see recurring problem areas. Or perhaps it might let you understand why they are never clicking on something that you've designed that you wish they would see better. So it lets you kind of compare sort of before and after. And the third one is Google AdWords. And I know ads sometimes in the nonprofit sector can be a bad word, but Google AdWords is a great tool even if you don't use it, even if you don't have ads. It's a great tool to track keywords, because keywords are the words that people type into search engines to find your site. So oftentimes we can get reports on the people who typed particular words and went to our site, whereas Google AdWords lets you get a huge amount of ideas of the way people do search on Google. And of course, Google is overwhelmingly used more than any other search engine, so it can be very helpful because you have this idea of the way you should word everything based on your knowledge of the law, and you go into Google AdWords and you can sort of see, oh wow, people are putting in words that I wouldn't have imagined, and it can be helpful to see how your page ranks in comparison to other sites and whether you're on the first page of results or the second page of results. So that's a tool that even if you're not going to spend money on the ads, it can be helpful to constantly look at from time to time to get a good idea of how to word things and how to use keywords effectively. Some tools that we used for user testing. So that's when you're planning a website or an app or a project and you want to test the site. And that's, again, not giving a demonstration of the test of a site, but actually putting it out there and sort of setting up some environments where people can test. So again, usability testing, you can pay a third-party service to set up task-based tests. So instead of asking people if they like your site, what they're doing is they are you're identifying with them the various tasks. So if you have a site where you really want people to register for an event, or you have a site where you want people to read through a particular set of modules or articles, you can pay a third-party service to select a group of anonymous people you don't know based on demographics you give them. You can do that, and you pay a per person per test price. Or you can do it yourself with online tools, and I'm going to show one that I used that was quite affordable for us when we were building Your Legal Rights. And so we did an invitation to volunteers, and we did the whole thing online, which was helpful because we could reach people in a huge geographic area. And then another thing is A/B testing, which Google has a tool for that, and there's lots of other tools out there. If you use MailChimp for your email bulletins, you can do A/B testing, which is you create two slightly different versions of the same thing, and you select that half of your users see one, the other half see the other, and then you can measure which one was better. So instead of fighting with your colleagues about whether you like the blue one or the green one, you can actually put it to the users and find out. So that's just another option out there. One of the things that's really, really helpful for just getting you past stats and getting you to actually figure out what the users are saying are surveys. They're also really helpful because they get you great quotes, that you can share with your funder and others about your success. And they also have, you can see the people's complaints, which can be painful, but very specific and useful. So the most common one out there used to be called 4Q. It's now owned by iPerception. And it's based on the idea that if every website users are asked 4 basic questions, then we can start to see some benchmarking and comparison of how your site ranks compared to others. But the idea is it asks users what the purpose of their visit is, and then you provide what those purposes are. And then it measures the degree to which they've been able to complete their task, and it measures their site satisfaction. And this tool used to be free. It's not free anymore. It's getting a little bit more expensive, but it has different plans with extra features. And I'm happy to show you an example of how we use it in a minute if you would find that helpful. The next are polls, and polls are basically designed to just ask a single question. So they're a nice way to let you get really quick answers. So there's some examples there, Poll Daddy and Poll Everywhere. So we ask, you could have a poll that simply says, asks a true and false question. So you can do it as a way to assess sort of the knowledge of the group you're working with, or you can do it around preferences between certain things. And Poll Everywhere is one where you can be at a live event and you can actually send a poll to the people right in front of you at your live event, and then you can display their answers if they do it through texting or through a web interface and stuff. So those can be helpful. I've used Poll Daddy a little bit, and we can talk a little bit about those later. And then the last are those vote modules. So those are those little things that show user engagement. So you may have seen them on a website where you have a thumbs up or a thumb down. So they're common in when you're looking at review sites, like on Amazon.com. Was this review helpful, yes or no? And if you're sorting through hundreds and hundreds of reviews or hundreds and hundreds of comments, it can be helpful to kind of have those modules up and down. So they're not really going to get any huge answer about your success or not, but they are going to show the popularity of key pieces of things over time. So again, it's that idea, a whole bunch of different tools, see what you can put together, slap it together and keep playing with it to see the various things. So Google Analytics, we see we have 10 folks with us today, 10 attendees. Can I get a sense perhaps how many of you have this and how many of you look at it from time to time in terms of looking at reports? If you don't mind typing that somewhere so I can see, it just does help me to kind of gauge whether you're Google Analytics ninjas experts or whether you, how basic your background in that is. Okay, so yeah, we do definitely have some folks with us today who probably know way more about it than I do. Hopefully there's some of you who are novice or just sort of getting used to it. Okay, so we do have people saying that we're beginners, so that's great. So we have some you probably have some big advanced users here, and we have some beginners. So that's great. So I'm hoping that I can give you a taste of kind of some basics. So this is a slide that just has the audience overview for my site, and here I am making myself vulnerable by showing our visits and stuff. But this is like a snapshot of our site in a year or whatever. So this is what you would have. This is what you would have with Google Analytics if you didn't do anything extra or any kind of customization. So basically the way Google Analytics works is you create an account for free, and they give you a little bit of tracking code, and you stick it on every page that you want to measure. But hopefully your site has been built in some kind of content management system like WordPress or Drupal or some kind of database so that you only have to put that on one page and it goes everywhere. But anyway, that's free, and you sort of stick that on the code on the site, and people can't see that code, of course, it's hidden. But once that code's on there, Google Analytics has a way to track all this information on people going to your site. So it tells you your visits. It tells you your unique visitors, and of course the distinction between those two things is subject to debate. I don't find that distinction all that helpful myself. And it tells you page views, so that would be how many pages were opened as opposed to just how many sessions or how many visits it had. And it gives you an average of pages per visit, which is really helpful. You kind of ask yourself, what kind of site do I have? Do I have a directory site where people are probably looking for one phone number? They're looking for one page to get one answer, to make a single phone call or to make a single referral. So your pages per visit might be quite low. What I mean by that is your ideal amount of pages per visit might be low, as opposed to an Educalois site, which is very, very rich in articles. So they may have a different amount of pages per visit. We just launched an immigration and refugee website here at Clio for service providers. It's really, really dense and rich and tons of information. I imagine that if they're thinking of how to set that site up, they do not want a pages per visit rate of like 1 page per visit. I would imagine that that would be a pretty problematic number if that number was really low. It might mean that people it's overwhelming and they leave. The average visit duration is also, again, connected to that. So pages per visit and visit duration, sort of looking at those two things and thinking about the kind of information you have, how long it takes to absorb, and what do you think is an ideal visit duration. The bounce rate is something that's based on, bounce rate is the percentage of visitors that go to just one page on your site before they leave. Now, this is sometimes can be artificially, and I mean, I'd love other people to jump in here. It's my understanding this can be kind of hard to interpret perfectly because you may have a site that bounces them because the domain name or the URL for your site may flip to something else. So sometimes the bounce rate can be wrong, but it can be imprecise. But looking at it over time is helpful. So the example in an entire year on my site is about a 50% bounce rate. So, you know, whereas my mobile site has a much, much, much higher bounce rate, and I suspect that's because people who look at information on a phone don't have time or inclination to stay very long. So they may be looking up something really quickly, maybe just a phone number and getting out of there. Or they may look at it and it may just, hopefully, they may just think they want to go take a look at that later when they're not looking at it on their phone. So the bounce rate is debatable. And the other thing to think about is, and we talked about this in the past, like if the point of our work is to get people to find our information quickly and leave, maybe a high bounce rate is a good thing.
That's exactly what I was going to. I'm sorry if I jump in here.
No, please.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Fiona. That's what we found actually is that since we've improved the organization of our website and definitely our search engine optimization, we found that the bounce rate has gone up, but people will stay longer on the pages they land on. Therefore, it's a good visit. They get exactly what they want, and they just leave because they've got what they wanted.
That's a great example. So that's terrific. So what Hubert is noticing is he's not saying, we just think that the higher bounce rate's a good thing. So he's combining it with another metric. So he's sort of saying, we've seen it go up. What does this mean? Does this mean our redesign is a catastrophe? No, he's saying, let's combine it with something else. So the page that they're going to directly, that's not the home page, they're staying on it longer. So if he combines that with the bounce rate, and then if we can look at a third thing, which might be that task completion piece, we get more of a complete picture. So some of this stuff with evaluation is like, okay, we've got two answers, so we're not really guessing. We're getting closer to the answer. Maybe we need a third way to look at that. So this is all examples of, you know, sometimes I wish we could all just go into PLEI Connect and post our bounce rates because I find this really interesting. And when I've asked questions at seminars, I've said, well, we're a portal site. Like, we're like ClickLaw. Our point is to get you into our site so that you know about some cool legal information. And then when you're clicking, we want you to go and read it on someone else's site. And we don't really care whether you stay on our site very long as you find what you're looking for. So for me, I probably have a higher bounce rate than Educaloa, but I want to look at it over time, and I want to compare it to the task completion. And I want to see if those pages, when they go directly into some rich page on my site, if they leave those much faster than the home page, that kind of would worry me too. So I have to kind of look at the complete picture. So if we take that a little bit further in Google Analytics, and again, I'm happy to look at it in more detail later. If you sort of look on the side, you can see the exact content that people have gone to. You can see the sources. You can see the kind of audience you have in terms of what the language they have on their computer. So you can see what percentage of people who have the language set on their computer to English versus French. You can look at the particular conversion. So you can, if you're using ads, you can measure exactly which ads had what number of success. There's lots and lots of stuff you can do. This is a custom dashboard, which is just something you can do in your Google Analytics because there's so much information that sometimes it's nice to just do your own little shortcut of the most important statistics for you. And you can change these all the time. So this is an example of the ones that interest me. So what we did was we set goals, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So goals are things you can set up in Google Analytics. They don't just arrive for free. So a goal is something where you decide, if you can see on the right side of the slide, any resource pages. So the main areas of the site I have is resources, common questions, organizations that I'm sending people to, webinars, and news. So what I'm looking at here is the amount of people that have gone to that type of page. And it instantly sets sort of my priorities. So when I look at this, I'm pleased because I want resources to be the focus, and I actually want these areas of my site to be accessed at the same percentage as my goals. So I don't want news to be the most important thing on the site, even though it takes up a lot of my time. So this keeps me in check about kind of like the various areas of my site and how much they're being used and what percentage of total users that is. So I can kind of watch that over time. I'm really interested in, I use AdWords. I use there's a thing you can get from Google Analytics, which I learned about from Hubert. So there's an example of the great thing about PLEI Connect, because I was paying for AdWords and I didn't have very much money. And AdWords are, if you've ever done a search in Google and you see a little ad that kind of recommends a particular site at the top, that's an AdWord. And you pay for clicks. So you don't pay, you pay only if people click on it, and you pay it based on the cost of the particular words that you've chosen. And you can spend a lot of money on those, and I didn't have a lot of money. And then Hubert told me that you can apply to Google for Google grants, where you can get free ads. So we now have those, and you have to learn to use them differently because some of the rules are different. But I have all my different types of ads. So my little bar graph tells me that my Ontario Works ones and my maintenance and repair ads are the percentage of visitors. So this tells me the top ones. You can even right there, you can see that my general ad is the huge one there, and Ontario Works, which is what our welfare system in Ontario is called, that's coming in on the top list, and maintenance and repairs, which is a housing issue, and child support. So instantly it kind of tells me which ads people are clicking on. I can look at my visits, my bounce rates. So these are just some examples of things that interest me. You might have a totally different set of things that you might want to track cities, like which cities are people visiting my site from. You may want to track it in different ways. But you can customize that a little bit so that you save yourself some time in Google Analytics, which is helpful.
If you just give me a second, I'd just like to add Google Grants is an incredible program. It's only meant to be used by registered charities, just to be sure, so that you understand that. And for us, I don't know if it's the exact same amount for you guys at Clio, but it allowed us to receive the equivalent of $10,000 of AdWords per month.
So that is exactly what we get too, and it's been really helpful. So, we use up our 10,000 pretty quickly.
Same here.
And it sort of is. It's like 9999999 at the end of the month, and it has like a daily cap as well. And
here's another hint for you. We've been told that if we max it out, we can actually request more.
Really?
Yes.
See, this is why PLEI Connect's so great.
Very recently.
That's awesome. Okay, so I have to go now because I have to go contact Google Grants. No, just kidding.
You have to finish the webinar first.
Okay, I have to finish the webinar first. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that later, and I'm happy to show you how that works because you do not have to be a technical person whatsoever to experiment with Google AdWords at all whatsoever. If you can write like an ad and put the URL in and pick keywords, you're off to the races. So we can look at that in a minute. But what Google Analytics lets you do is calculate percentage shifts over time. So this is an example of, like, I hoped when we relaunched ClioNet into Your Legal Rights that we'd see an increase in visits. And you can see that we have. So by looking at those visits over time, I'm not just spitting out numbers. I'm saying, oh my God, 241% increase, like between one reporting period and the next, right, 2 years later. You can kind of look at that over time, and it sort of helps you feel better about yourself. No, just kidding. It helps you kind of put the numbers into some kind of grid that makes some sense. So I mentioned things about goals. So what goals are you have to think about your site as what you want your users to do. And then you can set them up as goals in Google Analytics. So let's say each time a user completes a goal, it's called a conversion, and that gets logged in your Google Analytics account. So it's helpful to kind of spend, and I'm sure this is not true for other people on the call who are more technical than me, but I do believe that some of the Google Analytics help pages are written by sadists because it's not easy. Compared to the other tools I use, the explanations of things in Google Analytics are really challenging. So I think the more we can help each other to actually understand these things better.
Let's just say it's not plain language.
It's not plain language, no. And I'm being mean to Google because they do give us like free AdWords. But it's just that their help pages are just, I find them to be a bit of a Byzantine mess, and I don't often know what to do. But I think I've sort of figured out goals at the very least. So Now, the thing you can do is you can give your goal a monetary value. Even though we're probably not raking in money from these sites, that's not the point, but it does let you rank one thing to another. So if the most important thing on your site is that they order your print publications, then the goal of them completing in the order form, you could make that $10, and then perhaps them just browsing your browsing and opening the web versions of your various things might be $5. So by giving things a monetary value, you can rank them in relationship to one another. So in my case, a visit to resources on the site is more important and strategic than a visit to news. And so this lets me look at them over time and lets me see which sections are worth my time over time. So it's simply an internal thing that lets you kind of say, this is 50% more important than that. And it lets you improve a section of your site and see that value rise. So I want people to sign up for my email bulletin. I give that a goal, and I decide that I need to give that an increased goal. Like one of my goals is to get more people signed up, so I'm going to increase that value, and I'm going to do a bunch of changes to my site to make it more obvious to where you sign up, and I'm going to watch that go up, hopefully, if I've succeeded. So there's 4 kinds of goals in Google Analytics. And these things change all the time. I feel like when you try and understand this stuff, you can go to the bathroom and come back and everything's changed. Last time I did this presentation 4 days ago, this was true. So anyway, there's 4 types of goals. So there's a destination, and that's pretty easy. The first one is, let's say you have a page on your site that's really important and you want people to go there. So maybe it's the registration page for your conference, maybe it's the order form. So that's a specific location and how many times that location on your site loads. So that one's pretty easy. You can do those yourself. You just enter the URL, and you know, that becomes a goal. The next kind are durations. So we talked about how long you want people to spend on a particular site. So if you have a rich article and you know someone can't read it in 10 seconds, you might want to be able to make a goal, your ideal duration of time on that page, and measure that. The next is that pages per visit, and the last is an event. And the event is the complicated one. Maybe it's not complicated to other people on the webinar today, but setting up an event is a bit tricky. So that would be something being done on your site. That might be them clicking on an ad. That might be them opening an external link. So if you have a referral site and you put in the name of an agency and you want to track how many times people click through to that site, that would be an event. And those you kind of have to probably, depending on how technical you are, you might have to do something to your site to make those, like when you're planning your site, you might need to think about those in advance and do a little bit of customization to be able to capture those properly. And again, I'll try to show you how we've done it on our site. Imperfect, but we're working on it. And then underneath there, you can kind of see an example of my report. It compares all my goals from one month to the next. So it tells me that I had 10,000 completions of my resource pages versus 3,000 of my common questions. You know, and that I have to look, and I want my common questions to be more popular, so I'm going to try and work on that, move it into a different place on the navigation, do more promotion, do more ads. Hopefully I can see that common question thing going up. As opposed to if I didn't have that goal, I'd have to go into the content and I'd have to just do this random comparison of all the different thousands of pages on my site. Whereas I use goals, it saves me time, it lets me do these snapshot things. And I can look at the source and what percentage of goals completed by the source. So when people go just regularly from Google, so if you see at the bottom of the screen where it says source, people who just find me in Google, which is not an ad, that's just them finding me there, you know, they do 25% of goal completions, whereas number 1 would be the CPC, and that's cost per click. So those are those free ads that I get. So they're the number 1 source of traffic to my site. And I'm learning that if most of the people that come to your site come from an ad, they might not be your best user in the sense that they didn't know about you until they saw the ad. So they might, sometimes they're clicking and it's not necessarily what they expected. So you kind of have to adjust that. So I've learned from the other webinar that the web lab that was done by Caroline from Educalois, that they work really hard to make sure that their primary source of their site is just regular Google, not those ads. So I'm thinking, oh, how can I do that? But my email bulletin is my third, and only 11% of my, 11% of my goal completions come from the email bulletin. So again, this just sort of tells you what people do based on where they come from on your site. So these are just some interesting things to think about. The next is that heat map thing. So I just signed up to this new tool, well, new to me, ClickTail, and I think it's one of those things where you get a little bit for free and you pay every month and you get more. But the idea is that it does a heat map and a recording of an anonymous recording. Don't worry, you're not like watching people use your site in any kind of way that violates their privacy. But it lets you do, it captures a certain number of recordings, like 40 recordings a month, and you can actually watch, hit play, and you can watch what a random anonymous user is doing on your site. And you can kind of see their confusion or see the place they abandon your site and the funnel. So you can kind of see where they come from, where they go, how long they spend, where they click, and how long their attention is on a particular thing. So again, I think if you combine that with some of your statistics, maybe this is like taking it a step further. You can kind of maybe get at it without having to ask a bunch of people in person.
Yeah, if I may add to this,
yes.
It helps you to test the ergonomics of your whole site too also. You find something, you know, when there's something really important that you've put somewhere and you realize people never go to it, it means that there's a problem with that design in a sense.
That's right. And so that would be, and then again, that would, if you had a tool that measured that and showed you the mouse movements and sort of showed you that they're always going over to the right side of your site and they're totally ignoring something that you have on the left or vice versa, maybe you could do a slight design adjustment, move it into a different area, and then watch what happens. So this is the idea of being able to kind of watch and learn in an aggregated way. So Google Analytics aggregates everything. It takes like every single user and kind of puts it into these huge pots, whereas something with a screen recording thing lets you look at just a sample. And usually if you sample 25 people and 21 of them are doing the same thing, it's enough users for you to kind of get a sense, oh, they're not even seeing that thing. Oh, dear. So that's the idea of the heat map tool. Again, I'm happy for other people to jump in with better tools than this, but this is just one that you can get a little bit of information from the free one, and I have to assess whether I'm going to pay to get more because I don't know. I probably can't afford it. And the next was this user testing. So user testing is when you're starting out and you are deciding to do something and you want to find out if your designs are good, if your site's going to be good. So I thought I should start by just talking a little bit about best practices. So user testing is not taking a bunch of people into your room and giving them muffins and saying, do you like our new site? And it's not a tour. So it's not supposed to be guided. So it's not one of these things where you stand up and say, this is what you do, and then you click here, and what do you think? That has value, but it's not really user testing. So user testing needs to be observable, and it should be done early enough that you can make changes. So I just wanted to mention that you can do the best way to do it is in person. Like if you can have them facilitated in a computer lab with third parties that can give the tasks and summarize the findings for you, and you can be out of that room, that's ideal. And the testers should be asked to verbalize the process. So if they're frustrated and they can't find something, they're supposed to talk as they go, talk to themselves. I can't see, what is that? And ideal, you have a web camera that would actually show them furrowing their brow and being confused. And then you want to be able to watch and observe later and not help them when they're lost. That's the best way to do it, but we can't always do that if we're reaching a huge geographic area or we don't have a lot of money. I have done them I've done them online. And I did it with a tool called Verify App. And so in April of 2011, I conducted sets of online usability tests with wireframes, which are kind of a design-free blueprint. And I asked 15 volunteers to click based on some tests, based on what they would later on be doing on the site. So this is what a wireframe looks like. It's like a version of your site that has no color, no design. It's just supposed to tell people the structure, the architecture of what's there. So this was a test where this popped up, and the question was, where would you click to find information on eviction? And you give people like 10 seconds, and you find out what they clicked on. So it's one way of finding out that they are totally lost, and they keep going to the wrong area. It also surprises you because you get different results than you thought. So they go to the next thing, they click on housing, and again, you give them another link test. So you can see there's several different things here about eviction, and we hope that people find them. And so then we went back to the same people, and we changed our wireframes based on their confusion, and we did a mock-up test with design. So this is what we thought that your legal rights should look like. We went back to those people and an additional group of people, and we asked the same questions again. Where would you click to find information on eviction? And then we got a heat map that showed, and sorry these are black and white, it's just that they were all colorful and beautiful, but I had to cancel my subscription because it cost me $30 a month and the tests are over. So But you do get nice PDFs that explain. So you can see that the heat map, most people clicked over here where it said eviction, so they kind of, but some people kind of went other places. And then the most important thing that was really helpful was we told people to put comments. So we said, we want your feedback on this page. Put notes on the screenshot. So we got demographics on the various people who did the testing, where they were from, and people gave lots of great content. So some person says this page is clear, but the next person says this is cluttered. You know, you should do this, you should do that, make the search box bigger. And we made sure that we did this early enough that we could improve the site. So the site you see now is not that site mock-up you see. So we were able to take their recommendations and put them into practice. So for us, it was really helpful. And the tool we use, you can do lots of things with that tool. So you could, this is an example of from their site. This is an example of like 2 different ways to do an app for booking your holiday. And the question is, which one would you choose? And you just click on whether you like this one on the right side or this one on the left side. You can also, perhaps if you're developing imagery, so let's say you're doing a youth website and you have some photographs and images and graphics and you don't know, you know, which ones people will respond to better, you can simply show them 2 different images or show them an image and say, how did that make you feel? And people can very quickly give a result. And the other thing which I think is cool is a memory test. So let's say you have the home page of a website with a whole bunch of legal topics, and you put it up there for 10 seconds, and then you say, try to remember as many things as you can. So that's an example that might tell you that your thing's too cluttered. It might tell you that people are focusing on particular things. So you can use these tools to kind of test accessibility, navigation, emotional response. And they're very cheap. So this particular tool, I think, is like you only need it up for a month. You pay your $30. There's no limit to how many tests you can do. So I'm sure there's other great tools out there, but I found this really helpful for me. I haven't. Oh, I see a question here about the comments that were provided. Yeah, at the time, I put it out to people in the justice system and legal clinic system because my site, the old one, Your Legal Rights was, CleoNet was intended for them. So I put it out to service providers to do a test. But I did make sure to ask people, to screen for people who identified as having not a lot of knowledge of websites. So I made sure and get people who are sort of service providers and frontline workers from all over. And yeah, so I asked for volunteers of my existing user base, but for my second round of tests, I put it out on Twitter to a much, much wider audience, and I got 30 or 40 people. So they were more of the sort of general users. But that's a really good point that one of the people's making there. So I've heard good things about this other testing tool called onlineusability.com, and you basically just say, I want women between the age of 18 and 36, and I want them, I want them within this city, and they will choose those people from like a paid volunteer basis, and then you can kind of get more of a generic sample. I mean, this is the problem, is that we all have limited budgets, and we kind of have to ask user testing is a bit of a favor. So you have to try and make sure you don't just pick people who already like you. So that can be a trick. That's why none of these tools are good enough on their own. But they sort of, if 25 people keep having the same problem and they're service providers, I think it's fair to say that your general public's probably going to have those problems too. So I would like to think that what I did at least helped me make the site better, but it's certainly not the end of the improvement process for me. So I don't want to go over time here. I just thought I'd also mention the user experience survey, which is that 4Q thing. So what this does is it lets you create a post-visit survey, which means that a little thing pops up and says, at the end of your visit, would you be willing to take a short survey? And you can set the invitation rate, so anywhere from 100% of visitors to 10%, and you can do it at key time periods throughout the year. So I don't leave mine up all the time because it would be really annoying. So I'll put it up for 4 months, I'll take it down, I'll put it up for 4 months, I'll take it down. And what it asks users what their primary task was, whether they completed it, what their next step is, and for the paid version, I get the extra question, which is, would you recommend my site to others? So this is what the dashboard looks like. You can see that we have, we've had 5 over the years, and you get lots and lots of responses. I think if you have like a Survey Monkey thing up in the corner of your site, you might not get too many. Because this kind of floats up and interrupts their visit, you get a much higher number of responses, and the more people who do your survey, the more accurate it is. So this is what it looks like. You're coming to my site, and then this thing pops up and says, welcome, your opinion's important. Would you like to participate, yes or no? And so we have the invitation rate at 20% for people visiting our site from a desktop computer, and 10 on a mobile device, and 20 for a tablet, and we leave it in place for 4 to 6 months every year, and that's our way to sort of baseline. So we this also, you get these nice dashboards that tell you what the task completion rate is and the overall satisfaction rate, and what they're using it for, and whether they're going to recommend it over time. One of the challenges I find, I don't know if other people have found this, but people keep anonymously telling me what they're looking for, and I can't help them find it because I don't have their names, and so they'll say, I was, my boss did this to me, and I'm really upset, and basically, even though I've said everywhere, like, if you want to actually ask us a question and get a referral, you have to email us through the site, but that's one challenge. I don't really, you ask people, why they couldn't find what they were looking for, and they just go into their problems, and I think that is a specific issue with legal information sites. It doesn't matter how many times you tell people where to explain their situation, they're going to do it in the wrong place. So I check this all the time because I worry that someone thinks that it's being checked all the time. That's one thing. If you just set up your survey and you look at it annually, it could be full of like people in crisis in their comments. So you kind of have to look at that. There is a way for people to leave their email address, but I don't know that people do. And the other thing that I've noticed, and I don't know if this is true for other people, now that our site's not just for service providers, users can be more negative, because I think when my site was for service providers, they knew Clio, they kind of knew us already. They preferred, or they were more willing to sort of poke around and open a few things and kind of compare which thing they found most useful. And I think a lot of our new users are just people who clicked on an ad and were looking for an incredibly specific answer. So I've noticed that my overall site satisfaction rate's going down, even though my traffic's going up, like all the other indicators of success are going up. But this one, did you complete your task rate, is going down. And so I have a wider net. I have more people coming to my site, so I have to factor in what is my KPI. I mean, I would love it to be 100% around people's task completion rate, but I think it's impossible when you provide legal information referrals for you to have a 100% success rate, because there simply are not enough places to refer them to. So I think we have to constantly keep visiting this issue and comparing amongst ourselves. There's also user polls, so I have this little was this helpful, yes or no, on my site. And again, that just tells me over time something about user engagement. It tells me that people clicked that, they found it helpful, they didn't. I can look at the percentage of people that did click that over time. Again, they're all just different ways I'm trying to get at overall things. And social media, when I think of the most important things to track in social media, with Twitter, of course, it's how many tweets you're sending out, how many followers you have over time. With Facebook, it's how many likes, and it's the level of engagement. And you can look at your percentage changes over time. So with Twitter, you can measure retweets, which are when people like your tweet enough that they send it again. And mentions, that's really hard to measure over time. It's better to log it and schedule it. So if these are important things, you're going to have to, every 6 months, you're going to have to go in and take a snapshot. With Facebook, you can get something called insight reports, and they show you impressions, which is how many times people have seen your postings and how many times they clicked on them and how many times they generated a story out of your post. And that kind of tells you that your Facebook page is having an impact in terms of people being engaged by the stuff you post.
And your viral percentage also.
Yeah, that's right. And so this is an example of what those Facebook, so if you have a Facebook page, you have an insight report, and that tells you on a weekly basis, how many people are talking about your postings and which ones, and that can be helpful. You could spend a lot of time in here, but basically it kind of helps you make the case, perhaps to someone above you, that being on Facebook has value. People, over 1 million people saw my post. I certainly can't say 1 million people saw my post if I just put it on my site. There's also something called your Clout score. I always laugh because this is a bit of a vanity project, but Clout is a place where you can go and you can measure on a daily basis your overall social media score. So this is how much influence you have. So it used to be that you did it as an individual, and now you can do it as a business. So your legal rights is a quote-unquote business, and we have like a 90-day score of 58, in terms of how many people are looking at our information. And I like that it breaks it down by network. So you can see that the influence of your legal rights is 65% Twitter and 32% Facebook and 3% LinkedIn. So I wonder how your site would measure compared to the various things you're doing. Like I'm not really in Foursquare or YouTube. If I was, I'd be able to pull in more networks. But these are examples that just let you, and you would look at your social media clout score over time, and it just does all the work for you. And it's kind of cute because you could sort of, if you did a big campaign on social media, you could look at your clout score before and after and kind of get a sense if it worked. And then there's other free tools like Tweet Reach that shows you how many accounts were reached by your individual tweets. And again, vanity projects, but it can be interesting. So those are just, that's like my little tasting menu of some tools here. So I'm hoping that I haven't talked so much, but the good news is if I have talked too much, hopefully some of you, if not all of you, will go on the web lab and we can all do a little more show and tell and talk a little bit more. But if we have time for questions or comments, it would be great to hear from you about some thoughts you have. These are some things I'm always asking myself. You know, which is how do we? We're over time, exactly.
We're a bit over time, so maybe leave it for one or two questions if you have them. Use the Q&A at the bottom, and if not, I'll be taking over. You can keep in touch with Fiona, as she's just pointed out, with all this info. You watch it every day, right? Your
Pardon
website,
me?
your Twitter, your Facebook, and everything.
I have no life. I have no life at all. No, just kidding. But if any of you have any questions, I respect your time, and we are out of time. But if any of you have any questions or comments or anything that you would like to share, I really hope that you come on the web lab. The other thing I wanted to say is the web lab is 2 days from now, and if you haven't signed up, you sign up at the same place that you signed up for this. There you go, clbc.webex.com. Thank you for that slide. I speak and he provides. And the web lab is a way for all of us to, it's not going to be led by anyone, you know, I mean, I'm facilitating, but we can just look at whatever we want. And if you've taken a webinar with us before and you just really want to talk about anything we've done so far, let's just show and tell. Let's try to learn as much as we can in our last web lab together. And so perhaps we can also screen share. So we can look at any one of these tools in detail, and tools that you can show us the tools you use, which I'm sure I'm sure many of them are.
I'm pretty sure we will, actually.
Yeah,
so thank you. I'll take over for now because we'll have to leave soon. So a reminder that the project partners are CLEO, Courthouse Libraries of BC, Éducalois, and POVNet, that we could do this thanks to the participation of the Law Foundation of Ontario and the Department of Justice of Canada. Don't forget to participate in the PLEI Connect community online. And thank you all for your presence. Don't forget to register for the web lab. We'll be delighted to have you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.